All right, earlier today I had a chance to sit down with Senator Cramer. You might not know this, but he is the only North Dakota senator and or congressperson to ever serve on the Armed Services Committee, the first and only. He's also one of the very few, I think one of two actually, he serves on the Veterans Affairs Committee. So because of that, we wanted to have him on today to pay tribute to our great veterans, of course, here on Veterans Day. So we talked about that. Also, on last Thursday, Senator Cramer had a special phone call with President Trump talking about the North Dakota family that was massacred in Mexico. Here's some of our interview. Senator, great to have you in studio, especially on this Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to you.
Happy Veterans Day to you and to all the veterans out there and their families. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It's an honor to have you here. You're the only North Dakotan ever to serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee, one of, I think, what, two or three maybe on Veterans Affairs. So for our audience that are watching, how do you, being on those two committees, make a difference for the outstanding men and women that serve our country, our veterans, and all of North Dakota?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Chris, because I sought a position on those two committees, and you're right, I'm first ever on Armed Services. I'm the second on Veterans Affairs, the first permanent member, and I can describe the differences if you'd like, but the reason I sought those two positions was because of North Dakota's outsized, really punching above its weight class in the area of national defense, whether it's the military bases that we have here that are so important, our National Guard, which is so important. But as much as anything, it's the fact that we have 50,000 plus veterans that live in North Dakota that our people sign up to serve at a rate of over 4 times the national average. And I thought, you know, this is an area of representation that's really important. What I didn't think about as much when I chose those committees, or I sought them, was how big the responsibility was. I really didn't. I probably should have thought more about that. But I've enjoyed it immensely. And when I say enjoy, I use the word somewhat hesitantly because it's not like it's fun, but it's certainly stimulating and certainly satisfies my curiosity.
So you're on the Veterans Affairs Committee. It's Veterans Day. You hear about the high suicide rates for our vets. I think Fargo VA does a really nice job. But there are some challenges across the country. If you had a magic wand, like what's the one thing you'd go, boom, I'm going to solve that for our veterans today? Yeah,
well, certainly, if it was a singular issue, it would probably be in the area of mental health and mental health services, providing more of them, providing them closer to home. But, Chris, this is a problem not just for veterans. This is a problem across the board where mental illness and mental health do not get the attention, largely because of the stigma that's associated with them, that other, health issues get, obviously. But there's also a shortage of practitioners. There's a shortage of psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, people, counselors, people in the field that that can stand in that gap and help heal. The other thing I would do, probably even if I was put a finer point, it would be to eliminate the stigma associated with mental illness, addiction, and take that and add it to the fact that they're a veteran. For some reason, that's even an additional stigma for some people, or at least they feel that it is a stigma, and I think it's unfortunate.
So here's what's interesting. You're saying, hey, Chris, there's not enough people to help our veterans right now with psychologists, counselors, things of that nature. What I interpret you saying is we've got so many in need because we've been in so many wars for so long. Yeah. Do you agree? Is that an unfair assessment?
No, I think it's really, first of all, there is a high demand, and the demand side is too large, for sure. But I think it's really more on the supply side. When I say supply, it's supply of the service, the people that can provide these services to our veterans. Yes, we have way too many. But remember, we have fewer veterans today than we've ever had, and we're going to have, or at least for many years, we're going to have fewer going forward because there aren't as many people serving as there used to be.
Correct. I think you're going to get more into where you've got, drones and things of that nature doing more of the warfare. But my point is that does President Trump have a point? It's time to bring our men and women home.
I see where you're getting at. So this is
let's stop putting them in these hot zones, especially like northern Syria. And look, we love the Kurds. And yet, why are we fighting and putting our young men and women at risk 8,000 miles away?
Well, this president, more than any president that I've, in my adult time, is focused on what is America's interest in a particular war, in all of these wars. What is our interest in Syria? What is our interest in Saudi Arabia? What's our interest in the Middle East in general? And those are fair questions. I think for a long time, those questions weren't really being asked, or we find ourselves getting sucked into someplace and then we're trapped there, and well-intentioned people have us remaining there. And this president, more than any other, has challenged that industrial complex, if you will, that tradition. And just the other night, he called me on Thursday night, we talked about this very point. And he said, Syria is 8,000 miles away. The context, of course, was what's going on in Mexico, where we have this terrorist problem right across our own border. Are our resources misplaced?
You are reading your mind. I'm going to get to your phone call with President Trump in a moment. I do want to ask you this, one more question about the Veterans Affairs and Armed Services Committee. So like you said, this is new for you. There's a lot of hot spots across the world right now. For our people at home, if they had a chance to sit down with you, what keeps you up at night knowing what you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. So on the one hand, being a North Dakotan representing the Minot Air Force Base, the Grand Forks Air Force Base, the North Dakota National Guard, Army, Air Force Guards, and the incredible sort of missions that they are involved in that have direct benefit to the security of the country and the world and the cause of freedom. Not just on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce of here in North Dakota, but on behalf of security. That's what drives me. To the larger point, what keeps me up? I think what keeps me up more than anything, Chris, is that we have near-peer enemies now. We didn't used to have that. That the concept of a major conflict with countries like Russia, like China, countries that are investing much more than we're investing. By the way, when we invest great numbers, great dollars into our military, it's largely to pay our military men and women. I mean, the largest pay raise in the last 9 years was last year. The largest one in over 10 years would be this year if the Democrats would stop screwing around with impeachment and finally help us pass the Defense Appropriations Bill and the Defense Authorization Act. So what bothers me is that our near-peer adversaries are catching up to us, and they're investing particularly in innovation at a much faster rate than we are.
So if you had to pick one spot, would it be China, Russia, Venezuela, space?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
And that's a little bit of the problem.
Right, let's move on to your phone call with President Trump on Thursday.
Yeah.
He was calling, obviously, about what happened to the North Dakota family down in Mexico.
Right.
What can you share with us about your phone call?
Well, we talked about the family. We talked about the North Dakota ties, of course. What I did is I brought him a message from the family. They wanted me to tell him. I asked them. I said, what would you want him to hear? And it was just that, we're worth fighting for, too. Mexico's worth fighting for, that the wars around the world are as important as they might be, really don't compare to the war that we're in down here. And when I shared that with him, he said, I don't disagree with them. In fact, he said, I agree with them. That's when we talked about other hot spots and whether that's a place to deploy or, spend our resources when we have this problem right across our border, which, as you know, whether it's the cartel killing American citizens as it happened last week, or whether it's the cartel killing American citizens so that they can free up the sale of drugs that are killing our kids all over this country, it's hard not to call it a war, and it's hard not to call them terrorists.
Here's what's interesting. According to the president of Mexico, AMLO, the weapons that were used to kill this family were smuggled in from the United States.
About 90% of the weapons that the cartel has came from the United States, as we know. Ironically, Mexico outlaws gun ownership.
Naive. Well, how does that happen? How do we not? I mean, here we've got people like Beto saying we're going to take away your AR-15s in the United States of America, and you're telling me that 90% of the weapons the cartel has are coming from the United States. Can we cut that off?
Well, one would think we could, but remember, there are a lot of people. There's a whole orthodoxy out there that doesn't think we should even, protect the border. We should just have a wide open border and let everything flow back and forth. And that, and so could we? Sure, we probably could. And there are people working on that. But remember, the last president had an attorney general that had a gun running program that participated in this.
But I guess isn't there some sort of bipartisan opportunity here, knowing that what Beto's saying and what the other Democrats are saying, and I'm assuming that you don't want U.S. weapons going into the cartel's hands. It seems like an obvious no-brainer for us to do something about it.
Sure. Well, I don't know what that something is, but clearly we have intelligence resources and whatnot that should be able to catch some of that.
Do you support, back in March, President Trump suggested labeling the cartels as terrorist organizations. Is that a yay for you?
Yeah, there are like 5 or 6 different official terrorist designations, and there are foreign terrorist organizations which have implications. That's what the president did with, Iran fairly recently. That has implications as it relates to banking and sanctions and things. There are state-sponsored and state-supported and these various categories that have different ramifications. What I would consider, in fact, I think in terms of definition, it's almost hard to deny, what I'd consider the Mexican cartels to be would be criminal terrorist organizations, and that means they're not supported by a state. They might be tolerated by a state, but they're not supported. They aren't official state sponsors of anything. They're just sort of allowed to function. But I don't know what difference it would make.
They may not be, and I guess that's my question. Does it change the rules of engagement? And number two, I think if you talk to most Mexicans, they would say, look, we're a narco state. I mean, this is not a clean government. So thus, couldn't you say that they are helping funding, quote-unquote, state terrorism since it's a narco state?
Perhaps you could, but I guess my question would be, what goes with the designation? What does that do? The president and I talked about a little bit the other night. What's the... what would it take for the United States to even have a green light, if you will, to engage on the other side of the border? They are a sovereign nation. However they're governed, they're a sovereign nation. He actually has quite a good relationship with the president of Mexico, Obrador, as you know, and he talks about he's working very hard on trade deals. He was successful on the USMCA during the transition of presidents in Mexico. So we've had some good relationships at the very highest official levels. The problem is, most public officials in Mexico are either paid off or they're frightened. And who could blame them for being frightened? When you have criminals that have better munitions than your government has, and local police departments certainly, that's a problem. So it would take a collaborative effort.
Should we put military down at the border?
I think we could certainly be using a lot more military presence at the border.